Hi and welcome to the tutorial on the shopping tote. So this is the lined version of our eco grocery bag. A couple of housekeeping things. We're going to sew our seam allowances at 1 centimetre, which is 3/8 of an inch. Make sure you thread your machine with a thread that matches your fabric, and we're only going to use just a plain sewing stitch, so you don't need an overlock or anything like that for this bag. And the other thing is, it's a good idea to lengthen your stitch length from normal, because sometimes with these heavier weight fabrics it just looks a bit nicer if the stitch length's longer for the top stitching. Also it makes it easier to unpick. So when you're ready, let's get started on the straps. So just a word about these straps. I've put a pattern piece in for you, but to save fabric you can just cut these the width of the fabric, so they're actually patterned for 1.20 m, and sometimes your fabric might be shorter or longer than that, so just adjust the length of these to suit. It's not really going to make a huge amount of difference to your final product. So take one of the straps, we're going to fold it so right sides are together, and we're going to sew a seam on the side, so making sure that's at 1 centimetre, remembering to back tack at the beginning. Sew your seam. And back tack at the end. Now when you've done one strap, repeat that for the other strap. So now we need to turn these so they're right side out, so I'm going to use a turning tool, but you might find a safety pin or something like that is easier. Now we're going to attach the straps to the front and back of our bag. To do this we need to mark a placement line, so take a tape measure and measure out 10 centimetres, which is 4 inches from each side. So we're going to mark a line up. Now I've just done this with tailor's chalk, but you could just mark it with pins if you want. And then we're going to mark down from the top 3 centimetres, which is around about 1.5 inches. So this is going to be the placement line for the outside of our bag strap. So when you've done it on this side, go ahead and put it on this side as well, and then repeat that for the other piece, which will be the back. So this is the placement point for our strap. So what we do is we place the strap this way up, matching the raw edge at the bottom to our placement line. So we're going to sew on the edge of the strap up, across our mark line and down again. I'm going to sew this as an edge stitch, which is around about 1 or 2 millimeters in from the edge of our strap. When you get to this position here, stop with the needle down in your work, turn and pivot, and we want to sew a line parallel with the top of our bag. Stop when you get the other side of the strap, with the needle down in your work, turn and pivot, and sew back again. Now what we need to do is just turn this strap around, making sure there's no twists in the strap itself, and position the strap on the other side and repeat what we've just done. So now repeat this for the other piece until we have a pair that look identical. One will be the front and one will be the back. Now we're going to sew the contrast bottom piece onto our bag. Take your piece and place it right sides together on the front or the back, it doesn't matter, they're identical. And we're going to sew with a 1 centimetre, which is a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And you really want that line to be as straight as you can possibly get it. Now we're going to put an edge stitch on it, just 1 to 2 millimeters in from the edge. Now this is to add strength to our bag, and it also looks good, so if you wanted to, you could stitch that in a different coloured thread. Now make sure when you sew that the bulk of the seam is on this side, so we're sewing through all the thicknesses. And because it looks nice, I'm going to sew a second line of stitching, exactly parallel to the first. So now I'm going to take my other bag piece and I'm going to place it right sides together to sew the back piece of my bag. And we're just going to repeat the process. We're going to sew a seam at 1 centimetre, which is 3/8 of an inch. And just remember to make sure you back tack to secure the beginning and end of your stitching. So now we're going to open it up and we're going to make sure that the bulk of the seam is facing the contrast bottom piece, and we're just going to repeat the top stitching effect we made on the other side. Now we're going to fold this in half, like this. And we're going to sew the sides of our bag in place. So make sure we match the top, and we're going to sew a 1 centimetre which is a 3/8 of an inch seam here as well, making sure that we back tack to beginning and end our seam. So as we sew down here, what you need to make sure of is that these seams here sit directly on top of each other. And repeat for the other side. So put a crease in with your fingers at the bottom of that bag, so at the fold position, and we're going to sew a triangle, and that's what's going to create the flat bottom of the bag. So the easiest way to do this is to pick the bag up and this side seam, just press it open. Then open the bag up, and what we want to do is that crease we created needs to sit exactly on top of that side seam. So that ensures that everything is parallel. When you've done that, you need to get, and it's easier if you do this with chalk, but a pin's fine as well. We're going to be sewing a parallel line to this line here, but we need to put the position in. So take your tape measure and measure 4 inches, which is 10 centimeters from the point of that corner, and place a small mark, and do the same here on this side. And we're going to sew between those marks there. So I'll just chalk myself in a stitch line. As you can see, this is parallel to that line there. So we're looking at around about 5 centimeters, which is 2 inches. And if you measured this line, you're looking for around 13.5 or 14 centimeters, which is maybe 5.25 inches, or 5, yeah, it is 5.25 inches. Okay. So once you've got that position in place, come to your machine and stitch, remembering to back tack. And just eyeball it as you go, just to make sure it's nice and straight. When you finish that, take your shears and cut that excess off. So you're going to leave about 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch there. Now we're going to repeat that for the other side of the bag. So put a crease in at the bottom, come to this seam here and open that up. And then what we want to do is put that crease directly on top of that seam line. We're going to measure down 10 centimeters, 4 inches, mark it, same on the other side, mark it. We're going to draw a line between the two positions. You could do this with a ruler. I'm just doing it on the edge of my tape measure to give me a very rough idea. And then I'm just going to measure it, checking it's around about 13.5 or 14 centimeters. And then we can just double check that that's 2 inches, which is 5 centimeters from our sew line there. And sew. And then cut the excess off. Okay, so now we're going to work on the lining piece. So now we're going to work on the lining. You'll notice your lining pieces have notches on one of the edges. This shows us that this is the bottom. We're going to sew this bag together, but we need to leave an opening through this area so we can turn the bag inside out. So what we're going to do is place your pieces right sides together, and we're going to sew from the top edge here down and across to this first notch and back tack. So the seam we're sewing is 1 centimetre, which is 3/8 of an inch. Now you'll see the fabric I'm sewing here is burlap or hessian. It's a softer cotton version of it. The only thing I will say about it is it will fray a lot, so just be mindful of that and think about maybe overlocking this edge as well if you feel you need to. So stop when you get to 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch before the edge. Leave your needle down, turn and pivot. Sew your seam until you get to parallel to that notch. Back tack and stop. Then what we're going to do is just come to the next notch and start sewing again. Now we need to sew the flat bottom into our lining as well. So we're going to do this pretty much the same as we did the main pieces of the bag. Pick the piece up and open up these side seam pieces. So we want these seams here, when we've pushed it open, to be sitting on top of each other. So if you find it easier, you might want to just put a little pin into place like that. Then smooth it out. So when that's nice and flat, just like we did before, measure from that top point down to 4 inches, 10 centimetres on both sides, and place a mark. Join those two marks together with a straight line, and that's the line we're going to stitch down. Now take your shears and cut off that excess. So I've cut leaving a 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch allowance. Now do the same thing on the other side. So now you see we have the flat bottom of our bag lining in place. You can clearly see where we're going to turn this bag through. So now let's put it all together. So take this bag lining piece and turn it right sides out. And then find your main bag piece. And what we're going to do is place this lining into the bag. And what you need to do is find this side seam. Once you've found that side seam, match that to the side seam on the main part of the bag. Push those seams open, and at this point you might find it easier to secure it with a pin. Now work your way around the top of the bag, making sure that you push that handle inside because we don't want to sew over our handle. And find the other side seam and do the same thing. And make sure you push that other bag handle in as well. What we're going to do is sew the two bags together. Make sure that any ease is evenly distributed so you have a nice straight edge. And I'm going to start just before one of the seams, match those raw edges, and sew a 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch seam allowance all the way around the top of the bag until one side meets the other. Make sure your handles are pushed in because we don't want to catch those while we sew. Great. So what we need to do now is turn this bag through. And if you see any stray threads, just clip them off and do a bit of quality control work. So what we want to do now is find that lining opening edge, and we're going to simply stitch that closed. So just press your seam allowances under, which is 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch. We're just going to top stitch that edge closed. Match the folds. And I'm just going to create a little top stitch or an edge stitch. Now place that lining inside the bag. And we're almost finished. So you might think we're over, it's not quite yet because we do need a little more reinforcing around the top of the bag in the stitch position. So this bag is made so that there is a 1 centimetre turn back here. So just push that lining to the inside, leaving that 1 centimetre, 3/8 of a inch gap there. What we're going to do is we're going to top stitch this bag. We want to sew a line of stitches somewhere around here. It's up to you whether you want to do 3/4 of an inch or an inch. Just whatever looks good to you. We just need another row of stitching for reinforcement. When you do this, make sure the handles are in the correct position. So I'm just going to go ahead and change my thread colour and I'll be right back. So it's up to you whether you want to sew this from the right side or the wrong side. I'm actually going to sew it from the wrong side because I think it will be easier to deal with these handles. But what I'm going to do is start close to a side seam. And I'm lucky enough to have stitch width guides on my machine here, so I think I'll sew that at 2 centimetres, which is 3/4 of an inch, and start on top of one of the side seams. It'll just look a little bit tidier. So as you can see, when I passed by the handle, just make sure it's pushed flat. just remember to back tack at the beginning and end of your work, and do some quality control work, just tidy off any stray threads. So well done, you've reached the end of the tutorial. I hope you've enjoyed this sew along video. You can of course customize this bag in any way you wish. Thanks for joining me, and I look forward to you joining me for my next sew along video soon.